Witam serdecznie. Ja tu mam takiego jednego komentującego, już go widzę od jakiegoś, od jakiegoś czasu, ale dam mu szansę teraz i powiem wam, na czym to będzie polegało, bo to jest tak, napisał mi 4 godziny temu do tego filmu, jak oszukano ludzi, rozdzielając lądy i tworząc kontynenty. Jak ja nie lubię, jak dobrze ludzie wykonują pracę dezinformatorów. Wszystko, co mówisz w tej serii, to stek bzdur, z jakiegoś powodu nie dajesz sobie szansy tego udowodnić. Jak nie znacie podstaw historii, jak macie odkrywać, przekazywać wiedzę innym, czyste dezinfo i linka mi wysłał, prawda, do czegoś. Napisałem mu, masz bana, dość już tego jęczenia, bo mnie to zaczyna denerwować, ale myślę, może ma dobrą wolę, człowiek tylko ma sposób pisania bardzo agresywny, a ja tego nie lubię. Tu mamy następne. Ja pierdzielę, ale gówno odwalasz. Z lewych sanek na lewe sanki. No co to jest za słownictwo? Skakujesz. Mam pomysł, zacznij myśleć. Super, zagospodarowali was do tracenia czasu. Na 100% fake. Poczekaj, co za babsko. A nie, bo to nie on napisał, dobra. To nie wiem, czy mi to wyskoczyło. Chciałbym ci ofiarować trochę wiedzy. Mam nadzieję, że się skusisz, bo to jest ta wiedza bliżej prawdy niż cokolwiek to ostatnio wypuszczasz. Tutaj do czegoś, prawda? Dzięki za link i to jest chyba do tego filmu, prawda? Link, który sobie zaraz oglądniemy. Dobra. Tylko robię takie wprowadzenie po prostu, tak? Odnośnie tego gościa tutaj. Bo sobie przeglądałem komentarze i on ma jakieś ciągle zastrzeżenia, prawda? Błagam, zlituj się i weź łaskawie, poświęć swego napiętego dnia i przeczytaj to 3 razy. Potem się zastanów, czy nie jedziesz lewymi sankami, ciągle lewe sanki wszędzie się pojawiają. Tu będzie który link? No tu znowu jakiś do czegoś nowego, prawda? Okej. To bzdury. Faktem jest, że świat ma naturę elektryczną, naturę fraktalną, ale to procesy odwrotne w swoim działaniu, nie wygląd ciała energetyczne, na przykład DNA. A, ta Majestic Era, właśnie, to jest bardzo inteligentna osoba. Przeczytam tylko tą wymianę zdań, zaraz przechodzę do tego filmu, a jeżeli w tym filmie nie będzie żadnych wartościowych rzeczy, tylko na przykład bzdury, to wtedy naprawdę po prostu dam bana, bo nie podoba mi się ten sposób rozmowy. No i ta Majestic tutaj napisała, czy napisał, bardzo proszę, w sumie jak możesz zacznij od tego, wkrótce, bardzo niedługo znowu zobaczymy owe smoki wychodzące z ziemi i w nią wpadające. No dobrze, to nikt nie powiedział, że tak nie będzie. To bzdury. Faktem jest, że świat ma naturę elektryczną, naturę fraktalną, ale to są procesy odwrotne w swoim działaniu. Nie wygląd ciała, a energetyczny, na przykład DNA. To zaś układa się w struktury plazmowe, dlatego zawsze przez jakiś czas utrzymuje się fantom plazmowy, mimo że ciało, materia już nie istnieje. Dalej skala, ona się odnosi właśnie do fraktalnych odpowiedników jako makro albo mikro, a faktem jest, że obcujemy z wycinkiem podłoża makro, a jesteśmy mikro drzewa na kilometry, giganty, jak i mikro obecna skala. I gdzie tu jazda lewymi sankami? Lewymi sankami jest obecna nauka. Majestic Area. Obecna nauka to specjalnie zdefragmentowana i podzielona maszynka do ogłupiania mas, dlatego nadal szukają czarnych dziur, czarnych energii i tak dalej. Co do gigantów i dinozaurów, to chyba jasne jest, że musiałyby być odpowiednie warunki, aby mogły żyć. Na przykład zanim trafiliśmy do naszego obecnego Słońca, mieliśmy inne. W obecnym układzie słoń w góry nie wbiega, bo pompka mu siądzie. A to, że wszystkimi procesami w nas i w kosmosie rządzi elektromagnetyzm, dowody daje tu znowu jakiś blok, prawda? Dodam jeszcze, że wszystkie budowle megalityczne spełniały funkcję rezystorów, chroniły przed wyładowaniami międzyplanetarnymi. Majestic Area, tu znowu link. Ogarnąłeś już skalę braków w edukacji. Do Majestic on to pisze. No jest chory psychicznie, bo to jest osoba bardzo ogarnięta. Czy jak każdy poliniak w dupie byłeś, a tam jak w domu? Jeżeli nadal nie zatrybiłeś mimo tak aroganckiej wczorajszej odpowiedzi, będziesz po prostu idealnym reprezentantem mentalności poliniaków. Blog ma więcej części do serii, która podważa wszystko, co wiesz i będziesz wiedzieć. Ba, robi to na przykład z Ziemi innych planet. Elektrycznie proste i skalowanie w laboratorium. Zaskocz mnie pozytywnie. I tu Majestic Area, Adam K. Nie była arogancka, mechanizmy nie są efektami. Wiem i tak napisałem, że świat ma naturę elektryczną. Pozdrawiam. Świeża lekcja. O, lekcja, prawda? Znowu geniusz. Dobrze, to już wysłał tyle razy, że po prostu... Aha, bo to jest cały czas znowu to... Tu mamy to, tu mamy... Dobrze, zaczniemy od tamtego. Jak nas wciągnie, to sobie oglądniemy następne. No widzę, że rzuca linki Bzdura. Pojęcie takie jak poniżej to dla ciebie zapewne czarna magia. To klucz do zrozumienia tego, co się będzie dziać. No dobrze, dobrze. Co ty odprawiasz za czary? Ja pierdzielę, już nawet na ciebie nie można liczyć. Z pewnością się zapoznałeś, tu jakaś dyskusja, no i wrzuca te linki, prawda? Powiem tak, nie oglądałem, nie tracę czasu, bo sam temat dawno temu sprawdziłem, a ty zaryzykuj, oglądnij dowolny, lepiej w kolejności filmik. Dobrze, i tu wysłał co? Jezus Maria, dobrze, cała playlista, ok. Dokładam jeszcze kilka naukowych faktów. Dobrze, fakty naukowe. O Jezu, no to od czego w końcu człowieku zacząć ten twój zgłębianie, prawda? O Jezu, kolega przekręcił nazwisko. No dobrze, no to przekręciłem i co z tego? Nieważne to jest, bo wmówili im, tym dziennikarzom pseudo jakimś, że dziennikarstwo to trzeba dopełnić jakiś warsztat, bo coś tam sobie państwo wymyśliło, że jakieś trzeba dopełniać jakieś gówno i dlatego oni nie mogą nic opublikować, bo nie dopełniają czegoś. No to są oni właśnie. Umiesz angielski, nie grałeś nigdy w Totka, zaryzykuj i oglądaj chociaż 3 filmiki. Oczywiście źródła są dodane, ja osobiście przeorałem wszystkie, może dlatego tak się irytuję, jak widzę, jak ludzie tracą czas. I zweryfikuj sobie potem każdą datę bitwy, bla bla bla. Dobra, no to nic, zaprezentowałem mniej więcej, no wrzuca ciągle różne linki. Ostatni link, jaki wrzucił, to był ten i oglądamy, jak będzie dobre, to sobie oglądniemy następny. A jak stracę czas i się okaże, że to jest po prostu shit, to masz, kolego, bloka. Tyle.
Welcome to Cosmic Conversations. I am your host, Tess Clark, where we explore cosmology, spirituality, the occult, and many other fascinating subjects. So make yourselves comfortable and enjoy the show. Hey everyone! Today I'm going to explore and tell you about the hidden comet history of the Dark Ages, which encompasses the 500 to around 640 AD. And this is the time of King Arthur and Merlin, and we're gonna see how it was a historic character. So there seems to be several mainstream and alternative theories about history being added, or thousands of years being added, or there are missing periods of history because there is no stratigraphy, which means layers of archaeological findings, and there is very little documentation left behind by the alleged civilizations or cultures or timelines. And then there's also the mysteriously sudden disappearance of whole civilizations from their intact cities, or in the opposite case, their cities and buildings were burnt down to the ground, allegedly only due to the invaders and their enemies. And we never hear that this is the result of catastrophic natural events, and much less related to comets and conflagrations and earthquakes and tsunamis and axis tilts relating to the passing of great comets. There are also theories that several dark ages were fabricated. I think that it is really heartbreaking to think that we are denying the suffering our own ancestors. Think about it, it's your own family that lived through these times, and they survived these horrendous periods of catastrophic events. And there's a lot of recorded history by ancient historians. We only have to go and look and see what's written, and also archaeological evidence. I will briefly refer to King Arthur and try to make sense of it as being included in this period of the Dark Ages. And remember that there's so many of these cities or buildings, castles, towns that are not found because they were totally obliterated from the face of the earth, either by tsunamis. And we're going to see an example of a medieval city that was built or existing in the 1200s. And suddenly it was evacuated, abandoned by the 1500s. And then they found it, and it's totally buried under, I don't know, like 6 or 8 feet of sand and clay. So this shows that, and it's pristine, in pristine condition. And the archaeologists noticed that the roads that were supposed to be really low-tech and in bad shape during the Middle Ages, they were beautiful, and they were shiny and polished and made out of stone. So that's another misnomer that we have of the way that medieval cities used to be and looked like. This shows that catastrophes can happen instantly within minutes or days, and whole places get lost from the face of the earth unless you go and dig, or the earth gets overturned, and then any of the artifacts and that you could attach to that culture are buried under rock and stone, and you could never find them because the layers have been so upside down, turned over, that you couldn't really find them. And that's why we can't find a lot of these ancient cities. Or you also find that they have been rebuilt on top of another, and another city, and they just go on top one of each other. And then you think, why would the people go and build and bury these cities and build on top of them? It's because they didn't bury them. It's because natural catastrophes buried them. And just like in...
No dobrze, no i tu jest teza, że to są naturalne katastrofy, no a tutaj na przykład istota mówi od samego początku, że jest przecież powiedzmy, że ród, który ma dużo bardziej zaawansowaną technologię nawet w tym momencie i walnięcie bomby na przykład atomowej, wodorowej, jakiejkolwiek innej jest dla nich żadnym problemem, no i to będzie dla takich prymitywów na przykład oznaczać, których się trzyma w ciemnocie, załóżmy, będzie oznaczać katastrofę jakąś tam zewnętrzną, prawda, bo się robi reset, czyli wali się bombę po prostu konkretną, no i wtedy każdy myśli, że to asteroida. Teraz jakby chcieli robić reset, to też by opowiadali, że była koniunkcja planet i asteroida albo inne bzdury. Zresztą de facto słyszałem o tym, że NASA coś tam opowiada, że dzisiaj mi to mignęło na telefonie, powiadomienie push, że o jakiejś tam komecie, planecie coś tam pisali, prawda? No i w ten sposób by się reset przeprowadzało, więc no dobra, oglądam dalej, no.
Pompeii and many cities that were just completely covered by ash and clay and sand and just completely disappeared from the face of the earth, and then they're buried. Then people had to rebuild on top of that piece of land. And then people find, when they go digging in their basements nowadays, they find amazing buildings, ancient buildings that are just underground, and people can't understand why would they be underground, but this is the reason. So from the historic records that were left to us, including clay tablets, stone writings, petroglyphs, sacred texts, mythologies, epics, ecclesiastical books, which are religious texts, and manuscripts, which were intended to be read only by certain groups of people who were the elite, and they could speak Greek or Latin. And sometimes we see petroglyphs left by people who were surviving in caves as well. And they were common people trying to survive these catastrophes, and they went into hiding inside of these caves or crevices, wherever they could find, or mounds. We can see that the inhabitants of planet Earth have been, at least as far as we can see, in the last 7,000 years, bombarded by ongoing catastrophes and plagues. The reason is that Earth and other planets of the solar system were captured by the Sun and Jupiter, who were a binary system, together with hundreds of thousands of new comets, planets and moons that must have previously orbited Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, and that are up to this day entering the solar system and causing havoc to all the planets, and bringing in with their tails an array of toxic elements and mutated or new strains of viruses, which have been responsible.
No dobrze, a nuklearny wybuch nie powoduje skażenia popromiennego. Przecież rozłożyli sobie specjalnie 5G, bo to jest technologia popromienna, o czym wiemy, bo istota powiedział o tym, i może to służyć właśnie temu, żeby tu jakoś obsługiwać, chociaż ja nie wiem, te urządzenia by padły chyba w takiej sytuacji, ale coś takiego mówił. No przecież jeżeli jest skażenie radioaktywne, no to na przykład oni opowiadają o dżumie, a ta dżuma miała wszystkie przecież efekty skażenia popromiennego i mogli normalnie sobie walnąć bombę nuklearną, bo jesteśmy podobno 7. cywilizacją, i robić reset, a potem naopowiadali bzdur, że była dżuma, bo kontrolują sobie przecież szkolnictwo i wszystkie tutaj rzeczy. I prawdy jest ciężko dociec. Jest, ale ukrywana przecież. No i równie dobrze mogą to być przez człowieka spowodowane rzeczy i żadnych planet nie ma, tylko wymyślili taką bajeczkę, żeby dokonywać resetów, no.
For the frequent awful diseases known as the Black Death or bubonic plagues, which were pandemics, and they were not brought in by mice or by dirt or by dirty people. They were brought in by the comets or the interaction of electrical disturbances of planets with Earth. And there were mutations as well, and then the Earth opening up and toxic elements coming out, and sun cooling, which would cause fungus like the...
Tak, wybuch w Czarnobylu, sobie proszę przypomnieć, co się działo w Czarnobylu, właśnie jakie były mutacje i po czym to było? Po tym, że planeta spadła, czy nie? Czy może jednak skażenie radioaktywne, no?
Famous time in the medieval ages when people were getting ergot poisoning, and they actually blamed the women. They said they were witches and they were poisoning the people, and it was just because of the comets were passing and they were causing all these changes on Earth, and bacteria and fungus and different things that were not causing problems. Suddenly they started causing problems. And this is the reason that some tribes since ancient times avoided eating certain animals like pigs or pork and other animals that they called unclean, and they maintain a kosher diet. It was because of the diseases. They didn't want to get them. For example, the Maya and the Chinese knew about this relationship, and even now when Earth passes through the tail of Venus, and Venus has a tail like a comet, all the planets do, we get viruses that can cause the bird flu, the regular yearly flu, or the swine flu. Unfortunately, of course, as you know, which is a very popular subject nowadays, humans have weaponized these viruses as well. And we don't know now what is being caused by what. As if this is not enough, the miseries humans have to live and endure already by natural catastrophes, we have to add human-made pain and suffering. I really do not understand, but that is what is going on and has been going on for thousands of years. The name Passover, and celebrated by religions, it's relating to the passing of comets over the earth and their tails. And this is the reason why certain people and groups, like royalty and the clergy, that had the scientific and astronomical secret knowledge, which was known as the occult knowledge since the beginning of the civilization, would live away from cities, up in mountains, like the monasteries, castles, hermitages that we see. And they had access to caves and underground living spaces that had a source of water, and they acted as survival bunkers. And here they could protect themselves from radiation, viruses, pandemics, away from people, pestilence, meteors, fireballs, hurricane-force winds, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, electrical discharges, and thunderbolts. And these and the radiation caused mutations throughout history. And some mountain cave cities seen worldwide also had the same purpose. And of course, the survival wasn't always assured and depended on the severity of the catastrophes and where the comet was coming close by or where Earth was being affected. This is the reason piles of broken bones and mass burials are often found inside mounds or inside caves or even spread outside the mounds. And they like to call these battles, oh, there was a battlefield and there was tons of bones found in there, but it wasn't the case. It was people suddenly dying in mass or trying to hide, just like in Pompeii, in certain places, and they just found them. All these people found dead. These were the unfortunate people that didn't survive. Influenza. In 1743, it was borrowed during an outbreak of the disease of influenza, or a disease, in Europe. And it comes from the Italian influenza, which means epidemic influenza. Originally, visitation, influence of the stars and comets, from the medieval Latin influentia, in the astrological sense. An article from Rome informs us that the sort of plague has broke out there, which destroys an abundance of their people, and they call it influenza. And this is from the Gentleman's Magazine, April 1743. And remember that in 1744, there was this giant comet that came by. And 1766, we also approached Mars, so this might have been a moon of Mars. Used in Italian for diseases, at least since 1504, as influenza di febbre scarlatina, which was scarlet fever, on a notion of astral, occult, or atmospheric influence. The 1743 outbreak began in Italy. The term has been often applied since the mid-19th century to severe colds. And the concept of panspermia is well known and accepted by scientists. Another example is the bird flu, which first infects birds, mutates, and then infects other animals, like pigs, cows, deer, wildlife, and humans. And this brings me to a very
Jakby się doszkoliła na temat grypy, prawda, ptasie i tak dalej, to przecież tam w Parlamencie Europejskim na temat tych gryp było opracowanie, że to była skażona szczepionka podawana i niewspółmierne środki były zastosowane i to była praktycznie broń biologiczna i udało się to zahamować. Pani Burgermeister razem z panem Podleckim to zrobili i wtedy przecież ta Kopacz premier nie podała tych szczepionek Polakom i one miały skażony w ogóle skład i to sprawa była w FBI, tylko ukręcono temu łeb, bo to oczywiście chcieli na skalę globalną zrobić depopulację, a tutaj mi babka będzie opowiadać, że była jakaś znowu pandemia, prawda, wszędzie pandemia, jakieś samoczynnie się dziejące, tak jak teraz, samoczynna, koronawirus, prawda?
interesting article that just came out from September 26. It says that earlier this month, researchers wrote in their study that as a result, the origin of possible Venusian life may be fundamentally indistinguishable from that of terrestrial life. And a new study suggests life to Venus was taken, and they're saying meteors or comets scraping Earth's atmosphere, which is really silly. I guess they don't know history. They don't know that Earth and Venus have come very close to each other, as well as Earth and Mars, and Venus and Mars, and the Moon also. But at least they're acknowledging that there is some product called phosphine allegedly originating on Earth, and they have found it on the atmosphere of Venus, and there's microbial life and other things on Venus that they're saying it started from Earth and it got transferred there, and they're calling it panspermia, which is excellent. It goes all in relation with my 575 and Noah Webster and the ancients talking about the 575-year cycle, and Żulikowski of Venus interacting with Earth, coming so close, and we interact with its tail, which has all these elements, and Earth's elements get exchanged with each other. NASA in 2019 also found sugar molecules. I wonder what do they mean by sugar if hydrocarbons on 2 different meteorites, adding credence to the idea that asteroids play a crucial role in supporting life. Yes, well, you can just read Żulikowski's books and he talks all about that. And this could have been the manna falling from the sky during the approaches of comets, and that's why they call them the cows and the milk and honey, and that's what it was probably. So the inhabitants of planet Earth, and perhaps also Mars, Ganymede, and other planets and moons of the solar system, have constantly gone through practically hell and extreme suffering, such as worldwide pestilence, plagues, droughts, famines, and cannibalism, conflagrations, which are extreme fires, flooding, earthquakes, tsunamis, massive volcanic eruptions that cool down the planet for decades, like the Tambora volcanic eruption in 1815, megastorms, extreme cooling.
Jezu, to się dowiecie, co to są wulkany, bo to są przecież po tych pozostałości, po gigantach, po tych cywilizacjach, no i co tu będzie dalej? Że to jest strata czasu, w ogóle bzdury jakieś o kosmosie, planetach, gdzie było to wyjaśniane przez nas.
Mediterranean texts describe the 536
Opisywały.
is very near to the sun, or whether the defect of splendor in the sun was the effect of the attractive powers of the comet, or the electromagnetic interactions, or of an alteration in the electrical atmosphere of these bodies, or whether it was caused by an alteration in the terrestrial atmosphere, or a change in the atmosphere of Earth, is a question not easily solved. It might have been owing to a vapor, like that which overspread Europe in 1783. In 533 AD, a formidable comet appeared in the month of December in the sign of Sagittarius. It was followed by earthquake, a tumult in Constantinople, plague in Antioch and in other places, and the Huns caused troubles in Europe. In 534 is recorded one of the most distressing famines that ever afflicted the earth. It continued many years and destroyed.
Jezu, no to normalnie można było robić cywilizację w ten sposób, może się depopulację, może się rozwinęli za bardzo intelektualnie, trzeba było walnąć czymś i powiedzieli, że to jest meteor, prawda? I ktoś to zapisał. Przecież teraz na przykład, jeżeli będzie depopulacja robiona, załóżmy to, jak to historycznie będzie uzasadnione, że był koronawirus, straszna choroba, w dodatku Stany się pokłóciły z Chinami i była wojna. Dodatkowo prezydent Łukaszenka na Białorusi był strasznym tyranem i wszystkie kraje europejskie były przeciwko niemu, no ale on razem z Rosją nie chciał wprowadzać demokracji i dlatego wybuchła wojna, bo Polacy kochali wolność, prawda, i dlatego wyrżnęli sobie 2/3 kraju, a potem w szpitalu ich dokończy jeszcze ktoś, bo powie, że koronawirus, to ich będą mordować Chińczycy na przykład w szpitalach albo jakieś klony i powiedzą, że koronawirus jeszcze pochłonął ileś tam żyć, no. To dziękuję za taki film. To jest pierwsza żółta kartka dla tego gościa. Jeżeli dalej będzie to taki shit, to dostanie bana. Tu wysłał, to jest jego playlista, prawda, jakichś wspaniałych filmów. To jest już chyba początkowo obejrzane. To było to, tak? To dzieło wspaniałe, które mnie zafascynowało, to było to?
The scene, end of times.
Nie, to jest, ale to jest ta pani znowu, to ja nie chcę jej słuchać. Tu mamy z nowej serii coś, powiedzmy, tak? Dobrze, to sobie włączymy napisy, żeby każdy rozumiał i sobie lecimy. Co to będą za rewelacje?
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. For the last 5 years on this series, Thunderbolt's colleague Andy Hall has presented an extraordinary reconstruction of catastrophic events on Earth, exploring the telltale clues these events imprinted on our planet's surface. As Andy has described, many of the fractal patterns we see on Earth cannot be explained through any traditional geological process. However, these geological features find intriguing analogs in some of the highest energy atmospheric phenomena seen in our solar system today. In part 1 of this 2-part presentation, Andy continues his Eye of the Storm series with an examination of the remarkable filamentary and dendritic patterns seen on planet Earth, patterns whose explanation may be found in the ancient events that created the cultural memory of a mythical creature, the dragon.
Dragons are real, folks. This chapter may be hard to get your head around because we've been taught dragons are myth, but they are not figments of imagination. They come from the laws of physics.
No oczywiście były, no i są ślady takich skamieniałości, więc tutaj nie ma żadnej niezgodności. Sam nagrałem na ten temat materiał, bo facet chciał do Harvardu to zgłosić i do Yale, że znalazł takie znalezisko, nawet badał jakieś tam DNA i oni oczywiście tego nie przyjęli, bo to nie jest zgodne, prawda, z ich wizją prania mózgów, ich mocodawców dokładnie, bo oni nie mają nic do powiedzenia, myślę, no i nie przyjęli tego. Były, no to ja tego nie kwestionuję, prawda, tylko były resety, przecież mówiliśmy, że jesteśmy 7. cywilizacją, tylko powiedział istotnie, że to było robione bronią, mają taką technologię. Wiemy wszyscy, że ukrywają technologię, nie wiemy od jakiego czasu. Możemy domniemywać, że od bardzo długiego. A bajki o kometach to są bajki, wiadomo, że ktoś tam doszedł do tego, że coś jest zakopane, to chciał to uzasadnić. No to uzasadnił kometą, prawda? Ale nie tak to wygląda. To jest świadomie robione po prostu.
They also come from the bowels of the earth. You see rivers flow where dragons once crawled. As told in countless tales, they are said to come from the sea and the underworld labyrinths. There are so many examples, I don't think I need to quote more than one, but I'll save that for later. Go discover for yourself. After this article, you will recognize the physics of dragons in the stories of myth. Our ancestors were doing their best to warn us. And yes, dragons are still around. They're just sleeping. This is a concept some may struggle with even in the EU because so much of our theories focus on celestial chaos and the electrical havoc wrought by planets in close proximity. We imagine sparks flying, drilling craters into the surface of planets and moons, and there is overwhelming evidence of that. But that is what happens to rocky planets without an active magnetosphere. Mars, Mercury, and many pockmarked moons display significant magnetism, but it is mostly remnant, a static artifact of the past electrical activity that scarred them with craters. Planets with dynamic magnetospheres, atmospheres and weather like Earth and the gas giants, and even some of the moons have internal electric circuitry. Stars and planets are circuits, three-dimensional standing waves of current and magnetism living in the winds of their parent stars and galaxies. They are a product of inductance and capacitance, potentials and currents, and the magnetic fields current generates. The matter trapped in these 3D whirlwinds, gas, liquid, and dust, and yes, that includes us, is 100% organized by the circuitry. Circuits are cyclic processes. They produce resonant frequencies where signals are amplified and dampened in patterns of constructive and destructive interference. The atmosphere and crust of the planet are essential parts of the circuitry because they provide capacitance, energy storage, and regulated energy flow. What follows comes from simply understanding that the circuit flows inside the planet as well as in the atmosphere, plasmasphere, and magnetosphere, but it is all one circuit, and that is why things are so interconnected. There are feedback loops, oscillations, and high-order harmonic responses that bring order out of chaos, concentrating energy into identifiable coherent forms. The forms appear all over the place in geology and weather due to the role capacitance plays in the circuit. In the situation that Earth's potential is raised or lowered in response to some significant celestial event, the crust of the Earth can become saturated with charge. And based on applied science, the most violent discharges in a circuit can be expected through the capacitor. That is because a capacitor builds charge and a voltage across it that is the maximum of the circuit. And when a capacitor blows, it's the biggest bang of them all. Hence we have dragons. A dragon is a type of discharge event from inside the Earth. It's a short circuit around the continental plates generated by ground currents beneath the plate boundaries. The discharge is reaching for the other side of the plate, the top of the continental mound that is forming around the eye of the storm, where it's raining rock, dust, and water in a positive ionic mix relative to the current beneath the continental shelf. Once again, rinse and repeat. This is due to capacitance. In nature, capacitors aren't insulated the way we make capacitors. When we make capacitors for electric circuits, we want their actions to be predictable. The last thing we want is a short circuit, so we insulate the edges of capacitor plates to prevent short circuits from plate to plate around the dielectric medium. Nature doesn't do this. In fact, nature builds a continental plate as a big dielectric that is thicker in the middle and thinnest at the edge, sandwiched between a deep ground charge and an opposing surface charge. The edge effect at the periphery of a capacitor plate is called a fringing field. Think of it as a leakage of charge around the edges. It makes it the most likely place to have a discharge. And if current leakage occurs, it will make its way directly to the opposite plate and short-circuit the capacitor. Man-made capacitors are insulated around the edges specifically to prevent short circuits in the fringing field. The continental plates aren't insulated. In fact, the Earth's crust at the continental boundary, the seafloor, is much thinner and it lies over the ground current paths. Telluric currents beneath the crust are rivers of current that create the plate boundaries, and their magnetic fields create high stress. So the continental plates are structured not to mitigate the fringing effect, but to encourage short circuits, like a relief valve for the energy building below. Dragons are short-circuit discharges from the fringing field of the continental plates, discharging through magnetically stressed regions of the seafloor, fracture zones, and volcanoes. There you go. That is what a dragon is. No magic puff, but a ground-to-ground lightning discharge. Energy building beneath the crust tries to release through volcanoes, belching hot molten matter, heat, lightning, and clouds of ash. But every lava flow adds layers of matter to the capacitor plate. The plate gets wider and thicker and is dancing with surface charge from falling ash, rock, rain, and cooling lava. It's chemical soup. Every charged cloud of ash and water vapor forms another chemical soup, rising to a stratosphere already charged with plasma. The reaction is plasma storms of higher ion content today than today's little Chabascos. These storms build surface charge beneath them on a surface already dancing with energy released from the cooling lava. And so it goes. Charge keeps building across the plate until it short circuits in the fringing field. Essentially, the same thing happens in a cloud-to-cloud discharge, where the lightning streaks across the surface of the clouds rather than jumping to ground. Just think about it. The electric field of the storm is between ground and clouds. It's a potential of hundreds of megavolt, yet much more lightning goes sideways from cloud to cloud than from cloud to ground. There is a local voltage difference between clouds that is stronger than the prevailing electric field of the storm between cloud and ground. Of course, it's all one field, but the direction of its potential shifts. The field becomes stronger between clouds due to phasing. As clouds discharge lightning, they discharge energy and then rebuild it from the inflowing winds. This sets up cycles with hysteresis, and two parts of a cloud or two storm cells get out of phase with each other, which creates a huge potential. The arc closes this voltage gap. The path the arc takes predominantly follows a surface conductive path at the cloud's edge where the condensate boundary forms a layer of charged particles where droplets form. The same thing happens in ground-to-ground discharge. The subsurface and surface potential difference is oscillating. This especially occurs if the normal path of conductance is blocked, as volcanoes evolve gas chambers of vapor that choke current flow. These oscillations can spike voltage between subsurface and surface, amplifying ground-to-ground potential, and draw short-circuiting arcs from one side of the continental plate to the other, just like any capacitor would if you strip the insulation from its edges. How can we know this is true? Because charge diffusion and discharge takes fractal form, and we can identify fractal forms and understand what patterns them: electricity and magnetism. There is no question rivers take fractal form. Perhaps not every stream of water, but you'll notice if you pour water downhill, it generally flows straight down whenever it can, and rarely produces a lightning bolt-shaped fractal, unless you place rocks strategically in the path of the water, the way hydrologists do. Examine a man-made mountain where natural water erosion is allowed to occur, like the mine tailings pictured. The water erodes straight channels, but natural rivers, like the Amazon, the Congo, and the Colorado River, take on the same class of fractal form, called Lichtenberg figures, after George Christoph Lichtenberg, who first studied them. It is the form that arcing electric discharge takes during dielectric breakdown. Dielectric breakdown is another way of saying short circuit in a capacitor. Dielectric breakdown occurs as current paths form and continue.
Dobra, koniec może tego bełkotu, bo nie chcę mi się tego słuchać. To jest oczywiście prawda, jeżeli chodzi o napięcia, tylko to są dwie różne rzeczy. Najpierw facet opowiada bzdury o meteorytach. Drugi gość nie wie, jak wygląda Ziemia, bo pokazuje kulę, czyli idzie systemowo, nie bada, w ogóle nie sprawdza, że to jest niemożliwe. Ja tutaj argumenty podawałem na temat tego, że jest to niemożliwe, że była kulą. Jest oczywiście okrągła, tylko że jest dużo większa i mamy ten krater, o tym mówiłem wszystkim, bo to pisma potwierdzają starożytne. To teraz wejdziemy na film omawiający akurat takiego smoka, jak już żeśmy sobie zmarnowali trochę czasu, bo tutaj wrzucałem, a potem jeszcze możemy troszeczkę pokazać właśnie, jak Ziemia kiedyś wyglądała tym wszystkim mądralom, ale zaczniemy sobie tutaj. Buntowałem, to musiał oglądnijmy sobie tutaj analizę Matrixa, w jakim żyjemy, bo zakłamano historię. Na to wygląda, że faktycznie żyjemy w tym małym kraterze, a Ziemia jest olbrzymia i kiedyś cała była zamieszkała, bo nie była spustoszona i istoty, które tu funkcjonowały, były ogromnych rozmiarów. I jak były ogromnych rozmiarów, to proszę sobie zobaczyć. I to wskazuje na to, że one żyły w innym obrębie tej Ziemi większej, bo niemożliwe byłoby, żeby tak potężne istoty tutaj funkcjonowały, moim zdaniem. Także zapraszam do oglądania. No, według niego to jest po prostu wyładowanie elektryczne w ogóle, to wszystko, to trzeba by to wtedy w ten sposób wytłumaczyć. No to zobaczymy analizę, posłuchamy.
All right, there's the giant fish and there's the giant dragon. And the dragon is attacking the fish. And you have Google Earth, so I'm not going to get too crazy about this. But they are both decaying in the desert, dead and, decaying in the desert. That's the bleed off of bodily fluids from a dead, basically decaying gigantic dragon. And those are the scales of the dragon's throat. And it just runs down and down and down and down and down and down and down. Now, there's a gash right here. And it's bleeding out there. Now, what could have possibly cut the throat of this dragon that it runs from here to here, 1,000 miles or more? And it was in an ocean or a sea which ran out through here over the top of the fish and everything at the same time, all this drained. So that was a dragon who lived in the sea. And it's exactly what it says in one of the ancient texts. It said, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea with his great and mighty sword. Now, I am finding things that are written in the ancient texts, in the Bible, and all of the ancient texts that are absolutely true. I can see the evidence they're true. So don't tell me to shut up about this stuff. Because if you could talk about the Big Bang and about all this evolution and everything else, and I can't talk about what's really here on the earth, you go your own way. Stay away from me. Now, I know I get a little hostile, and I am hostile because of Yale and Harvard and all of these ones that we put our trust in. Let me show you. If you won't accept DNA certified evidence, PCR tested, deep extraction, very well done about creatures that existed that they consider rocks, like this goose. You see the pattern of his feathers right there? That's a goose. That's his neck. Died laying like this. I have giant human beings. I have bones from all kinds of creatures. Giant, normal size, every different type. Yale refuses to allow these to be seen. Everybody's, oh, take them to Yale. You go right down the street, 20 miles away. They refuse to look at these. Even though I presented DNA certifications, CAT scans, anatomist certified it as well. I have done the chemistry. I have recreated the process, and not a single university will look at these. None, zero. And Yale absolutely refuses to engage, other than to say, go find somebody that understands rocks, if you can believe it. After showing them all these things, what kind of a world do we live in now when this is the kind of education that is forced on kids, and then they have to pay, and then they have to agree to every single thing they say, or they will destroy them and keep their money? Absolute disgrace now. Unbelievable. Okay, my friends, this is the problem. Peer review is you have to do what your peers tell you, or they'll destroy you. And they know it now, and they're starting to, they're going to have to come around. False theories will remain dogma simply because no one is allowed to challenge them. Exactly my stuff. And I have things that destroy everything they're saying, literally everything. As soon as they open and let me start to talk, they are in trouble. They know it. That's why I am silenced. How many new and potentially successful concepts or ideas never see the light of day simply because peer reviewers decide to reject publications out of fear for their own reputation and livelihood? Lots of them. Beyond the lamentable enforcement of conformity in academia through hiring practice, social pressure, now even the anonymous peer review process may be perverted into active censorship of unpopular ideas. Absolutely 100% it is. No question whatsoever. I have been saying...
O, proszę bardzo, wyszliśmy od tematu, prawda, cenzury. Więc widzimy, z czym mamy do czynienia. Oficjalna nauka, WHO ma takiego fajnego chyba węża, nie to medycyna, prawda, ma takiego węża ogólnie, prawda, z pewnością nas nie chce zabić, prawda. Oficjalna nauka WHO, haha, no i jeszcze Harvard jakiś, prawda, śmieszny, który w ogóle nie uznaje, że smoki były, no śmieszne, nie?
In the most egregious way for 8 years. Now, the peer review people, they fear for their own careers, absolutely, because they will 100% be destroyed by the people that claim to be looking for truth and have no respect for truth whatsoever. Giant fish in the desert, giant dragon in the desert, not a single one will speak of this other than to say it's not there, we don't want to talk to you because you're crazy. And if you look at it, it is very, very difficult to dismiss this. And we have many...
Ja tu nie będę poruszał tematu, prawda, tego, jak oni sobie zakręcają powierzchnię Ziemi, bo tak jak mówię, tutaj jest teoria tego krateru, dlatego te wody się utrzymują, nie o tym jest materiał, więc nie będę tu prostował tego, że tak wygląda ta kula ziemska tutaj z jakiejś tam satelity, prawda, bo oni się przyznali do tego, że NASA, że to gdzieś tam w Photoshopie robiła, jeżeli chodzi o obrazy Ziemi i można w dowolny sposób sobie zawinąć tą przestrzeń, to nie jest program o tym, dlatego nie będę tutaj tego rozwijał. Chodzi mi o to zdjęcie tutaj akurat tego fragmentu, o którym pan mówi, nie?
Many other sites that are also equally gigantic, and this thing is 1,000 miles long. And it was written in the ancient text, specifically in the Bible, about dragons and all of these things, and that is what is the problem with peer review. They will be destroyed by their friends for talking about God because they don't like God. Now,
Dobra, no to tu się już, kolego, skompromitowałeś kolejnym materiałem o tych piorunach, gdzie jakiś mędrek po prostu uzasadnia, no jeszcze co on tu będzie, mam tracić czas 15 minut całe, chyba nie.
Continuously branching self-similar filaments in a process called diffusion limited aggregation. Brownian motion in a diffusing plasma results in a random walk where charged particles cluster and grow in dendrite trees called Brownian trees, and rivers in fine and large structure from headwater to delta consistently match the variety of branching dendrite forms seen with electric arcs, branching in multiple self-similar repetitions. The process is self-similar over time scales as well as dimensions. A dielectric breakdown may occur over years or nanoseconds and produce the same dendrite form. Lightning bolts occur in seconds, flashing several times through a channel created.
Dobra, co tam jeszcze były za filmy, prawda, tego inteligentnego gościa? Tu jest podobny, znowu ten sam facet. No.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at Thunderbolt. Andy Hall has presented an extraordinary reconstruction of catastrophic events on Earth, exploring the telltale clues these events imprinted.
To żeśmy akurat już widzieli, to jest...
Circuit the voltage across. This is because of active power is much more complex than water in a pipe. The up to the south, then turn abruptly back east to realign with the prevailing electric
Aha, dobra, on nam tu będzie uzasadniał to wszystko prądem, tak? Prądem.
field. First producing the Gila tributary, which I mark in A, and then the Bill Williams tributary in B, and when it
Dobrze, nie będę już tego słuchał. Aha, to główna teza tego w ogóle gościa to polega o prądzie, tak? Lewiatan, część druga. Przedstawiają fascynujący obraz światopoglądu ludzkości w czasach starożytnych. Przy interpretacji opowieści staramy się stosować nasz światopogląd. No i wszystko o prądzie, kula ziemska, jakieś tutaj pierdoły. Widzieliśmy generalnie faceta, który to przebadał i on tutaj będzie tutaj w ogóle o kometach z NASA opowiadał. No, przecież to kpina. No facet się tu powołuje na NASA, no człowieku jesteś ograniczony i zmarnowałeś mi tyle czasu. Dobrze, jeszcze odnośnie smoków i gigantów, zanim ci dam bana, to jeszcze chwilę puszczę tutaj materiał na chwilę.
I mean, let's compare silicon stamp with silicon stamp. Somebody still believes in the lava fountain? If I didn't know about giant silicon trees, I'd rather believe in giant cram injector and fan, but not in volcanic garbage. If you think that these two giant silicon trees are the only thing I can show you, then you are mistaken. There are lots of them on the planet. The funniest thing that normal people do not realize that they are stumps, but official science realized seriously that they should find how to hide these trees from people who asks too much and invented genius name for silicon stumps, the basalt cliffs. I want you to pay attention to those two pictures, where fibers hang from like the ceiling. How can volcanic version explain this? Lava was dripping, but its drops didn't fall to the ground, and other drops sticked by the hexagonal honeycombs to neighbor drops which somehow reached the ground. Look at this photo. Just a normal everyday photo with this girl. It is good, but the only thing that she do not realize that she is sitting near the giant stump of a silicon tree. All artifacts are in plain sight, but prism of matrix do not allow us to see 9 dolphins. There are tons of silicon stumps in the network. You can learn this topic by yourself. All distinctive features you know now, so Google will help you. And we are moving forward. And I want to show you one more hexagonal miracle of the Earth, of silicon nature. I want to introduce to you the biggest salt lake in the world, Salar de Uyuni, Bolivia. As you see, I will answer these questions lately. We will put this question into the background because this stamp that was cut is not single one on our planet. I will tell you even more. Devil's Tower is small one compared to others. Boys and girls, our aircraft is ready to fly. Our course is, well, we have no course. We will fly our planet around. Fasten your seat belts and better hold the handrails, cause everything you will see will overturn your notion of rocks and mountains. Let's go. While we are flying, let's play a game. Find 10 differences. So, there are only 2 differences, material and size.
Dobra, to kolega już inteligentny ma skalę mniej więcej, jak kiedyś wyglądał świat, jakie były wielkości drzewa. To teraz jeszcze ostatnia wersja jego edukacji tutaj moimi materiałami, chociaż były zamieszczone, przecież pokazywałem różne rzeczy, że można było sobie troszeczkę pomyśleć, prawda? I nie robić siebie tumana tak naprawdę, bo można czegoś nie wiedzieć, ale żeby drzeć gębę, że się kogoś oświeca, to trzeba być debilem, no, inaczej mówiąc. Witam serdecznie, tutaj ktoś podesłał ciekawego linka, prawda? To mamy o kolejnych stworzeniach, których nie było, oczywiście, tak jak tego smoka na przykład, bo ktoś sobie elektryczny prąd podłączył zamiast kondensatora do ziemi i zrobił dowód naukowy, dostał grant, albo dostał, nie wiem, lajki, no.
Was a globe, and all the rocks were just inanimate objects that were created through billions of years of the world terraforming into what we know now. We all came from a Big Bang theory, and in the scale of the universe, we're pretty tiny. But how wrong these stories are, because you see, this isn't the truth. The world was created by a creator. Every scripture for hundreds of years have spoken about this. Never will you read about a globe. And for the rocks, well, that's easy. There was a time when the earth was very different to what we know now. Giant silicon trees, giant silicon plants, giant, enormous animals. And the people, they weren't people, they were titans, and they were giants. And when they died, they did not just become bones in the ground. They became the rocks that we see today. Thousands upon thousands of these all over Earth. Undeniable in their shape and their stature, these were the beings that once walked Earth. The stories of these have been told for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. Native tribes know of this truth, and they celebrate and worship the rocks and the ground and the earth itself, knowing that it is something that is much bigger than you and I, knowing that it was all part of creation by a creator. As a child, we saw these faces in the rocks, and we knew there was something bigger to what we were being told. When we asked our parents or the teachers, we were told that our brains were just seeing faces and things that weren't really there. That our minds were trained to see and deceive us. But that is like saying we don't see our hands in front of our face. We know what we see, and we know that it's there. Now we know why. Because these rocks really did have faces. They were something that were very much alive. And now we can see, with new eyes, the truth that is all around us. That the rocks were once alive.
No i taka była skala kiedyś świata, prawda, i tutaj pokazywałem to, nie wiem czego tu można nie rozumieć, prawda, ten mi znowu będzie wysyłał do faceta, który co bada tam, kurczę, prąd, aha, komety, prawda, no dobrze, komety, resety, no to przecież mówimy, że 7. cywilizacja, tu o tych dragonach było, tak, chyba, że niby ich nie ma i tak dalej. Co on nas tu będzie? Umiesz angielski, nie grałeś nigdy w Totka, zweryfikuj potem każde bitwy, co tam kiedykolwiek się z datami kręci mu się. Co tam jeszcze? Zapadam do snu i dam znać. No już nie bardzo akurat, bo ci zablokuję możliwość pisania komentarzy, bo jesteś chamski. Jakbyś był kulturalny, to byś tu mógł sobie komentować, ale ty jesteś chamem i cię kojarzę od dłuższego czasu. Co ty odprawiasz za czary? Ja pierdzielę, już nawet na ciebie nie można liczyć. Tak, więc zacznij proszę cię od podstaw, ty bezczelny gamoniu, intelektualny brudasie. Kto ci dał prawo, żeby tak się brzydko odzywać? Na pewno nie ja. Dobrze, a nawet sobie nie oglądniesz mojej odpowiedzi z tego konta, możesz się przelogować ewentualnie i to też chciałem przekazać innym, że jak mają inne zdanie, można mieć jak najbardziej, tylko że proszę je wyrażać kulturalnie i taka będzie lekcja dla innych. Więc nie straciłem czasu tak totalnie. Pozdrawiam serdecznie, łapka w górę, hej.